Jai Jinendra Pranam. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our fourth Oshwal Health and Wellbeing webinar. Today, we are talking about the subject of diabetes, a subject that is of interest to many people in the community, with a lot of people, suffering from diabetes. Today, we are going to be joined by Professor Kamlesh Kunthi, but before, and also Smita Ganatra, but before that, we'd like to just start with the Navka mantra, please.
Om Namo Arihantanam, Om Namo Siddhanam, Om Namo Ayariyanam, Om Namo Uvajjayanam, Om Namo Lo Esabvasahunam, Eso Panchanamukaro, Sabbapavapanasano, Mangalanam cha Sabbeshim, Padhamam Havai Mangalam. Arhanto Bhagavanta Indra Mahita, Siddhascha Siddhi Sthita, Acharya Jina Shasano Natikara, Pujya Upadhyayaka, Sri Siddhanta Supathika Munivara, Ratnatraya Radhika, Panchai Te Parameshtina Pratidinam, Kurvantu Vo Mangalam, Kurvantu Vo Mangalam. Oshwal Association of the UK તરફથી આપ સૌને પ્રણામ. આપ સર્વનું આરોગ્ય સુખાકારી સારી રહે અને ખૂબ સારા કાર્ય કરવાની શક્તિ દેવ, ગુરુ અને ધર્મ પસાએ પ્રાપ્ત થાય એ જ પરમાત્માના ચરણમાં વંદના અને પ્રાર્થના.
Thank you, Jayesh Bhai, for that beautiful recital of the Navkar mantra. I'd now want to welcome today Tushar Bhai, Vice President of Oshwal Association of the UK, to welcome everybody. Tushar Bhai.
Jai Jinendra Badao. Thank you, Prafula Ben, and thank you, Jayesh Bhai, Pratna Mate. Welcome to today's fourth Apra Oshwal Wellbeing and Lifestyle webinars. Ajay, very important topic che, diabetes. Of course, we're doing a whole series of different topics on different subjects to ensure that we empower your lives, enrich your lives, and so diabetic or diabetes is an important topic. Kadat tame diabetic aso on the borderline, or you will know somebody who's diabetic. Yeah. And hopefully we've got some professional speakers today who will empower and give you a lot of knowledge. Tamare paase questions hoy to apno YouTube no channel che, please post them on there, and our panel will answer to the best of the ability in the time that we have here today. So over to you, Prafula Ben, to introduce our professional speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Tushar Bhai, for that lovely warm welcome. So as Tushar Bhai said, today's topic is about diabetes, a topic that has a lot of resonance in the community, and particularly in the South Asian community. Our guests today are Professor Kamlesh Kunthi. Is a professor of primary care diabetes and vascular medicine at the University of Leicester. He's co-director of Leicester Diabetes Centre and leads a research group that is currently working on the early identification of and intervention with people who have cardiometabolic disease or are at the increased risk of developing cardiometabolic diseases. We are also joined by Smita Ganatra, who is a dietitian and a nutritionist, at the West Watford NHS Trust and spends her time with lots of patients at the hospitals advising on dietary needs of diabetic patients. We're joined by Zeel Shah from Northampton, who is going to be sharing with us today the impact of diabetes, hereditary diabetes actually, on their family. So without further ado, I am going to introduce our first speaker today, Zeel Shah, who will be sharing the personal story of growing up with her father who had hereditary diabetes. Thank you very much. If you do have questions, do put them in the chat on YouTube, and our panel will answer those later during the Q&A session at the end of our talks today. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Zeel. I'm from Northampton, and I've been asked to talk to you briefly today about my personal experience of growing up when I was younger with a parent who had diabetes. My dad was at a very young age of 53 when he passed away, which was over 15 years ago due to complications around having diabetes, which I will share with you today. My dad was around 31 when he was diagnosed with insulin-dependent type 1 diabetes. From childhood, all I can remember is my dad taking an injection every day through the stomach. Now, that used to scare me growing up, as that's something that I never really wanted to go through myself if I was to ever get diabetes. As I got a bit older and started to understand more about diabetes and the effects of living with diabetes, I soon realized it was so much more than just taking an injection every day. And I will explain this in more detail about the complications shortly. Diabetes can be hereditary, and there was no escaping that for my dad, as it ran in his family. I can't tell you what the statistics were when I was younger with the risks of getting diabetes, but I always used to think that one of us three sisters had a high chance of ending up with diabetes one day. This made me very health conscious from a very young age, and I have ever since tried to stay active as much as I can and be mindful with what I eat also. For my dad, living with diabetes was like the norm. Taking injections every day, checking his blood glucose levels, going for regular diabetes checks, seeing the dietitian, going to work, raising 3 children, supporting us in everything that we wish to do throughout our life in our school and uni life. My dad had a sweet tooth and would always try to sneak in some sugary goods and always enjoyed dunking his biscuits into his tea. In order to stop him eating such foods, we stopped buying such treats ourselves like fizzy drinks and stopped making fried foods at home also. These simple adjustments in the house just to support him. A little later in life, he was diagnosed with high blood pressure as well as high cholesterol too, which are both factors linked to diabetes. At times, his blood sugar levels would fluctuate, and a few times he had a hypo where his levels completely dropped below normal during the night, and we would have to call out the paramedics. Other complications started to arise due to diabetes after he had a simple cataract operation. He became completely blinded in one eye and partially in the other. My dad had to stop working, and my mum continued to work part-time and care for him. As my dad liked to socialize, we got in contact with our local blind association, who put us through to a social group where they carried out activities, and he could still go on and enjoy activities such as bowls, even though his sight had gone. This made his other senses stronger. He could hear you from a mile away. Further complications occurred when both of his kidneys failed at the age of 46, and he was on dialysis for several years initially, having to go all the way to Oxford for it. Over time, this led to the weakening of his heart and eventually resulted in my dad having a major heart attack. I was 22 years old at the time and at home with my mum, and my sisters were 16 and 26 and were both out of the country at the time. They rushed my dad to the intensive care unit in Leicester Hospital to get the care he required. All I remember seeing was wires all over his body and being told that he was in a coma, and even if he was to wake up, he could have major brain damage. Also told that we may have to make the decision to take him off life support. That very same day, in the early hours of the morning, I got a call from a friendly Chinese nurse to say, "Come quickly, your dad is going." In that moment, even though it was the hardest thing in letting go, it was also the easiest. The reason being is due to a conversation I had with my dad only a few weeks prior to him passing. When he said to me, "I came into this world alone and I will leave alone." I knew at that point that whatever he was going through and feeling, he found his inner peace with himself, and perhaps he knew it was nearing his time to part. I just want to finish off by sharing a few great qualities of my dad, which amazes me, and I think helped him over the years living as a diabetic. He was not only physically strong, but mentally strong too, having gone through all that. And even though he had his frustrations, he still had a great subtle sense of humor to which lightened the mood and situation. Now, this all may seem like something out of a medical drama, but unfortunately, this was the reality for my dad and us. So take diabetes seriously and don't sugarcoat it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Zil, for that powerful account of growing up with dad and around diabetes. There were a couple of very emotional things you said about dad and the complications that your dad had later in life, and of course then consequently the loss of life when he passed away, in fact, in Leicester. I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Professor Kamlesh Kunthi, who is here to tell us more about the incidence of diabetes in the Asian community, the research. He will introduce himself in terms of his long list of accomplishments, but we're delighted to welcome you here today, Kamlesh Bhai. Thank you.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it, Kamlesh Bhai.
Okay, great, thank you very much. Jyoti Ben, Prafula Ben, Tushar, thank you so much to the Oshwal Association for giving me this invitation. It's a real pleasure to be here. And Jay Jendra and Jai Shri Krishna. That was a really powerful story that I heard. Unfortunately, so many such stories that we hear all the time. My father passed away of diabetes. The rest of my family, all the males on my father's side died of diabetes-related complications before the age of 55. And there's just so many stories that we can hear like this. But I'm hoping that I can give you some good news today that we can fight this terrible disease, diabetes, and there are ways to prevent diabetes. Can you still see my slides moving? Just want to make sure.
Yes, we can.
Right. Okay, so over the next 20 minutes, I'm just going to take you through prevention of diabetes and cardiovascular disease, because these are very interlinked. Now, at the bottom, you'll see a couple of paintings by Indian painters in Porbandar, that's where I am originally from. And these are farmers. I'm from the Meher community. We were originally farmers. And this is what you would see, the ladies and gentlemen that be working on the farms. The ladies would take the food, they'd carry all the milk and the water to the farm. And they used to have a staple diet of gur, ghee, and rotlo. And they still didn't get diabetes. And the reason is they were extremely active. And we'll go through that later today. Just a little bit about my center. I run the Leicester Diabetes Center, which is the largest research center in the UK and second largest in Europe. And we do a number of work programs on prevention and management of diabetes. We have a huge program of work on physical activity, but over the last 12 months, we've really concentrated on COVID, and I'm happy to take questions on that as well. So a quiz for you all. Samosas. Who doesn't like samosas? So these two samosas, how long do you think it would take to use these up? Can you see this? How long would it take you? Just give us a guess at working 5.5 miles per hour or jogging 8 miles per hour. How many minutes do you think you'd need to do to use up these two samosas? Okay. Pizzas, or as we call them, pizza. All of us love pizzas. My mother used to love pizzas. Unfortunately, she passed away 3 years ago. So this is a 12-inch pizza. How long do you think it would take to, to walk at 5.5 miles per hour or jog at 8 kilometers per hour to use up this pizza? Just jot that down. Have a guess. Write it down. See if you're correct or not later on. So why is ethnicity such an important issue in diabetes? Well, first of all, 1 in every 5 person in the world is of South Asian origin. These are people from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and some from Burma. In the UK, about 7% of people now are from South Asian origin. But we have the highest prevalence of diabetes. These are the prevalence rates globally. As you can see, top one at the moment is, it's gone to around 90 million now, I think, in India. But predictions are that by 2030, there will be 101 million people with diabetes in India, only second after China. And the reason most of this is because of obesity. In particular, what you see in the middle, central obesity. So in terms of history of diabetes, we have been connected with diabetes for many, many years. These are the Ayurvedic scripts that were written 1000 BC to 1500 BC. And diabetes was mentioned in these Ayurvedic texts. There were 2 people, Charaka and Shushruta. One was a medic, one was a surgeon. They accurately defined the etiology, symptomology, pathology, prognosis, and management in 100 AD regarding diabetes. And they termed it Madhumeha. We call it Mitopesa, it's called Madhumeha, a shower of honey. And previously, at that time, Egyptians were looking at diagnosis of diabetes, and it was based on symptoms. In Egypt and many other countries, they used to taste the urine to see if it was sweet, and that would give you a diabetes of Madhumeha or sweet diabetes. These chaps were very bright. They wouldn't taste anyone's urine. So what they used to do is used to leave the urine outside, and if a small flies or ants came along, that would make the diagnosis of diabetes. There's also in the text that possibly Ganesh ji also had diabetes. He's got the phenotype of person with diabetes. He's large, he's got central obesity, he sits there all the time. On the left-hand side, you see his laddus, and he eats all the time. So he's got the perfect phenotype of someone who may have had diabetes. So the types of diabetes are type 1 diabetes, that You need insulin from the start. They don't produce any insulin, so you need insulin from the start. And this can occur usually in a younger age, but it can occur at an older age. Type 2 diabetes is where you gradually get onset of diabetes. Initially get pre-diabetes, and then you move on to diabetes. Now, type 2 diabetes is very, very slow, and people often don't notice it unless you get tested for it. And by the time you're tested, there's many complications have already appeared. So this is very important in terms of about being tested for type 2 diabetes on a regular basis, and we'll come to that a little bit. Pre-diabetes, you can get rid of diabetes or even go from pre-diabetes to normality just with exercise and diet. Why are South Asians important in diabetes? Well, our work and many others people's work has shown that South Asians have about a 2 to 6-fold increased risk of diabetes. So no matter where you test them in any country that they have migrated to, UK, Sweden, Switzerland, US, Australia, Asians will have a 2 to 4-fold increased risk compared to the local population. And Pakistani and Bangladeshi have the highest risk, and Indians the lowest risk from the South Asian population. The same also holds for cardiovascular disease as well. And this is the reason it's important. So there are 2 types of body shapes, abdominal fat, that we term abdominal obesity. You can have apple-shaped obesity or pear-shaped obesity. Apple-shaped is upper body obesity, pear-shaped is lower body, mainly in the buttocks. It's the apple-shaped abdominal obesity or central obesity which is responsible for the highest risk. So if you're sitting with your partner at the moment, have a look. Are there apple or a pear, or are there a tarbuj? This is a really nice study. This is 2 colleagues of mine. The person on the left is a good friend of mine. They're both professors. One is a professor in Pune, Professor Yajnik, and the one on the left is a professor in Cambridge, John Yudkin. They are the same BMI, and BMI is measured through weight and height, as many of you know. They're the same BMI, but if you look at their body fat percentage, it's much, much higher. Now, this BMI is what we would call normal BMI. Anything below 25 is good. But their body fat percentage, 21% in Ranjan and 9% in Professor Yudkin. And this is the problem we have. We carry too much of fat. Now, historically, this is how we've evolved. We didn't have enough food prehistoric times. So when we got the food, we ate it, we stored it in our stomachs, and it lasted there for a number of days until we got the next lot of food. Now we have abundance of food, and this is causing the disadvantage, which was an advantage when we were evolving. So this is a scan, a central scan of the abdomen. And this is showing on the left-hand side what we would see normally. On the right-hand side, all the white areas that are fat in your abdomen. So I'll give you some stories and some really good research that's been conducted, how migration changes our phenotype. So this is what I call the Podgy in a Punjabi study. This was done, a really nice study done by Bhatnagar in 1995, published in a very well-renowned journal called Lancet. So they looked at the Punjabis in West London and their siblings, their brothers or sisters in Punjab. What they looked at is their age is the same. But if you look at the body mass index, much higher in those in Southall, blood pressure much higher, cholesterol much higher, and glucose much higher. What this showed is just that one generation migration to the UK, where we have abundance of food and we may not be exercising. Just within one generation, there was a change in the phenotype of that population, which was detrimental to them. This is another study. This is looking at people in Navsari and Sandwell. And a number of people from Navsari migrated to Sandwell. There's a lot of families there. And again, showing very, very similar. If you look at the population in Sandwell, this is within 1 or 2 generations. They have higher triglycerides, higher cholesterol, higher BMI, higher waist-hip ratio, more people have diabetes. Having said that, a lot more people exercised in Sandwell compared to Navsari, but Navsari, I tell everyone, is a lazy city. I know because my mother-in-law's from there. Don't tell her that though. Energy intake, again, if you can see increased fat content and overall energy in terms of people in Sandwell. So this is telling us that there are changes happening within a very short period of time that is making this happen. So this is what we call the urbanization to westernization. You know, we come from the left-hand side here, and we're moving to where food is of abundance. We're sitting all the time, we're driving all the time, and we have got access to so much food. And that's leading to the central obesity. This is a study one of my PhDs did looking at physical activity of people in the UK. They looked at South Asians and we looked at white Europeans. And overall, the proportion of patients who were sedentary, sitting more time than standing, South Asians sat for much longer periods of time than white Europeans. And this is very different to what we see in all the media. You know, we look up to all these heroes and heroines who have the perfect bodies. Unfortunately, that's not the case in the real world setting. This is a study, this is the worrying study that I did a few years back. Here we looked at Asian children and white children in Leicester inner city school. The children were aged between 12 and 16. And what we see here is their BMI again is the same. However, if their body fat percentage, if you look at it, significantly higher in South Asian children. So for the same build, South Asian children at childhood already have much higher fat percentage. And the problem is these people are going to become fat adults. And it's going to, they're in terms of the damage to their blood vessels has already started. In fact, it starts, some people think, while in utero, while the child is in mother's uterus. And there's already data showing that South Asian children are born with much more fat as well. Ranjan Yajnik has done some really good study on that. We then looked to see, and this is a very large study, 3,500 people with a high response rate. On the left-hand side, we looked at what were the negative markers of food these people had the day before and positive markers. As you can see, a lot more negative marker foods, chocolate, sweets, and snacks, and very little positive markers. On the right-hand side, physical activity in these children. And I think it's got worse since then because there are more people active on computers and tablets now than they were in 2007. 46% of people were either on TV or computer for more than 4 hours a day. And this was more so in South Asian children than the white populations. And this is another major problem. And this is a van that sits outside one of the schools with a high South Asian population. And, you know, we've been working with schools for many years to try and improve the food that they serve. However, when you get a van like this, the children will go to the van and not purchase food from the school. And then the school's losing money. They say we can't make drastic changes. You know, it's a catch-22 situation. So really, we need policy level interventions to change this. This study had such an impact. This was in times of India. They were worried about us in the UK, and this made headline stories that lazy kids face chronic health problems in the UK. So how can you see if you do have diabetes or you're at risk? So we've developed this risk score in Leicester. This is now freely available, and I'll give you a website shortly. So this is a risk score that you just put your tick marks to these various risk markers, and then it'll give you a score, and you add that score up. And then when you add that score up on the right-hand side, it'll give you a traffic light system. So you're at high risk, moderate risk. If you're at high and moderate risk, then really you should go and have a test done at your GP surgery, call your nurse and say you're at high risk. If you've had a test done in the last 3 to 5 years, then there's no need to have that test done. And this is the website address. It's at the Diabetes UK website. We worked with them. There are about 2 million people have now registered and assessed their risk using our score here. So how can we reverse this? Well, really, it's doing simple things to try and improve things in our everyday life. This is Gandhiji. Food has to be taken as we take medicine, quantity limited to the need. But quantity is very deceptive, as you know. First thing we need to do is replace seats. I wouldn't say replace TV. I'm not going to say replace televisions. You can continue watching televisions. And I used to say that to my father. Unfortunately, my father, as I mentioned, he had diabetes, had 3 heart attacks, 2 strokes, pacemaker, and then eventually died of a stroke. He'd given up after he'd had a stroke, poor chap. And he watched television most of the time in the house, and he'd sit there. And I'd tell him to watch television, because he used to watch about 6 hours a day, and I'd tell him to watch it 8 hours a day. But I said to him, watch it, but watch it standing up. And the reason is because you're still using energy when you're standing up. So if you want to replace anything, don't replace the TV. Get a bigger TV, but replace and get rid of the sofas. This is work from Claire Gillis from our group, showing for the first time, if anyone knows about research and looks at meta-analysis, this is the first, there's not many studies like this, which shows that anywhere they've done this study to prevent diabetes in people who have pre-diabetes, there's about a 50% reduction in risk. So just changing lifestyle, diet and exercise reduces your risk of getting diabetes if you have pre-diabetes by 50%. And these studies were conducted in Japan, in US, in India, in China. So consistent effect that you can prevent diabetes. So we can't, once you have pre-diabetes, you can't say that you can't reverse it. Even when you don't have pre-diabetes, there are all these things that you can do to stop you getting to pre-diabetes. The other one, very important, is sitting. Sitting is what we call the next smoking. Sitting kills. So this is a meta-analysis we did. It shows that people who sit more compared to people who stand more, they have a 2-fold increased risk of diabetes. People who sit more have a 2.5-fold more risk of having a cardiovascular disease, heart attack, or a stroke. And they have a 50% increased risk of all-cause mortality. And people say, well, how can that be? So the first study of this was done really cleverly in bus conductors and bus drivers. And this was published in the 1950s. And they found that bus conductors lived longer than bus drivers. And the reason is bus conductors were walking around in the old days, as you know, and bus drivers were sitting all the time. And then since then, there's been a number of studies showing this. And this is a meta-analysis looking at all those studies. Now, you may think that's not true, but what I'd like you to do now is while you're sitting, just put your hands on your thigh muscles. Feel them. They'll feel soft. Now what I'd like you to do is stand up, please. Now feel them. When you stand up and feel them, you'll see they're tight. So what's happening is when you stand up, the muscles are being used to keep you upright. And just by doing that, you're losing 40 to 50 calories per hour just by standing. So I use a standing desk at work now. I don't have time to go to the gym on a regular basis. Maybe I'll do it on a Sunday. If I stand 8 hours a day, that is equivalent to about 300 calories. And that's exactly the amount you would lose if you went for a jog at 5 miles per hour for 30 minutes. But you need to drive to the gym, get changed, do your 30 minutes or so, have a shower, drive back. And most of the time, we won't do that because there's so many other things to do. We may do it at Christmas and after Christmas, but after that, we all know it dries off. So just standing in the house, pottering around, and just walking as much as you can. It's really as simple as that. So finally, our genetic constitution hasn't changed much at all in 50,000 years. People think, oh, look, it's all genetic. It's not genetics at all. It's our lifestyle. We do have a genetic risk, but that genetic risk has not changed in 50,000 years. We didn't hear about diabetes 50 years ago. When we were in Africa, we were in India, no one talked about diabetes because many people didn't get it at that time. But what's changed really is our modern life, which is conveniences. And this also has had costs as well. Professor Sir Nilesh Shamani and I wrote this literally about 16, 17 years ago, that this epidemic of heart disease and diabetes is a disease of migration that's occurred within one generation. There's no reason why we cannot reverse this within one generation as well. So simple interventions, take small portions. We have this horrible habit of having the tapelu in the middle of the table and you keep eating as much as you want. When we invite guests, we make about 4 times more than what we need. And then everyone has to eat that for the next few days and we try and eat more to get rid of it. My father, a poor chap, I used to tell my mother off because anything that was left over, she'd give it on his plate. Now, that's the kind of thing that we shouldn't be doing. If there's anything left over, throw it away. Give it to the birds. You're doing more good than giving it to someone in your family. Have healthy option days. You know, there are still, I've got families who have samosas, kachoris, farsan type stuff every single day. You don't need to have it every day. Cut it out. Have a healthy option days and have it as a treat. Use the stairs as much as you can. You know, we always look for a lift, but that, you know, just that simple things doing every day is really important. This one is for you, Tushar. I've heard that every time you go shopping, you go around 2 or 3 times with your car trying to look for a parking place right next to the door of the shopping mall. Well, don't do that. What you want to do is park as far as you can from the shopping mall, and then you can carry all that shopping to your car and load it. That's exercise. You don't need to do anything fancy at all. Anything on the table, you don't need to eat it all. Stand regularly as well. Now, just something, this is really, really important. We've been leading the work on ethnic minorities and COVID for a little while now, and we have a really high risk. Asians have a 2-fold increased risk of COVID. People with diabetes have a 2 to 3-fold increased risk of COVID. People who are obese have a 2 to 3-fold increased risk of COVID. And the thing is, we live in multi-generational housing, and we do work where we're more in contact, pharmacists, doctors, shops. We bring it back. We may get mild disease or have no symptoms, but we are passing that on to our elders, and they're the ones who are getting the consequences of us bringing COVID back. So please be careful there. There's also, in terms of if you've got diabetes or heart disease or blood pressure, make sure these are all controlled. Make sure they're having checked regularly. If you've got diabetes, your HbA1c, try and aim for less than 7%. Take your medications regularly. Obviously, socially distance for now. Try and avoid household interactions. Continue with hand hygiene. And if you get invited for the vaccine, please go and have it. So now coming back to the questions I asked, look how much we can condense. This is a burger, 1,250 calories with a Coke thrown in free of charge, 140 calories. I shouldn't be showing this to the group here. I know most of you Jains are vegetarians. Tushar, you might be pleased to know I turned vegetarian 10 years ago as well. So samosas, 700 calories from 2 samosas. You'd need to walk 5.5 miles. You'd need to walk 162 minutes at 5 kilometers per hour to lose that. You need to jog for 76 minutes to lose those 2 samosas you ate. Pizzas, you need to walk 8 hours at 5.5 kilometers per hour to lose 2,000 calories. You need to jog 3.6 hours at about 5 miles per hour to lose those 2,000 calories. Just shows you we never think about it that way. Okay? Just a bag of crisps, you'd need to walk 2.1 hours to use that up. You need to jog 1 hour. You know, we just pick it up and we just eat it. Think about it when you're eating food like this. And things have supersized. You know, we used to have calories 20 years ago. The chips were 210 calories. The spaghetti was 500 calories. Burgers were 300 calories. Things have all supersized now. And so the supersized chips are 600 calories, would you believe? And you don't have to pay 3 times as much. It's 50% or 20% extra and you get supersized. And finally, I'd like you all to do what this lady does, please. Thank you very much for listening.
Kamlesh Bhai, thank you so much for that very, very informative presentation and that global research that you shared with us and some top tips there about things that we mustn't do. I particularly like that one about standing up. I never realized that before, but absolutely, it makes perfect sense. And you know, I'm going to be very careful the next time I pick up a bag of crisps because I never realized that either. And that final slide, I loved that. Very, very good. So thank you for sharing all of that. And I'm glad that there is things we can do to help ourselves in this, you know, often you hear of diabetes and people think, oh, there's nothing we can do to prevent it. So thank you for sharing that. Really helpful, I'm sure, to a lot of people. I'm going to introduce our next guest now, who is actually going to talk to us more about our diet and the diet that we have as an Asian community and what we can do. So welcome Smita Ben, who's going to be sharing that with us. Smita Ben's professional job is nutritionist and a dietitian at the West Watford NHS Trust, and she spends her days helping people with diabetes, patients with diabetes. So Smita Ben, thank you so much for joining us, and please do start your presentation. Thank you.
Namaste. Namaste, everyone, and thank you so much to Oshwal Association of UK for inviting me to speak. Zeal, a very, very powerful reflection on the impact of diabetes on your family, and Kamlesh Bhai, a really, really informative talk on the impact of diabetes and really combining diet and lifestyle to improve the impact that diabetes can have and how we can change things for our communities. So let me start. My presentation is a very practical presentation, and I really want to talk about practical things that we can do as diabetics or non-diabetics or pre-diabetics, because diabetic diet is essentially a healthy eating diet. Of course, if you're on insulin, then there's certain more criteria that we need to take into consideration. But this is kind of general advice for type 2 diabetes, pre-diabetes, or just general healthy eating. So if I could start with my first slide, and this is really a very simple concept, and it's talking about balance on the plate. We've heard lots about the calorie increases we have within one generation of migrating, but this is kind of looking at what we can do today in terms of what we eat. And this could be your plate at lunchtime or dinner time. So thinking really in terms of your plate, if you think about it in 4 quarters and think about filling half the plate up with vegetables, the other quarter is protein, and the last quarter is carbohydrate. And that broadly, in a very simple term, gives you a right balance on the plate. So I'm going to start off with carbohydrates in the first instance. Now, all carbohydrates, when they're digested, they form glucose, and that glucose is used by our cells to give us energy. The thing with carbohydrates is that they are digested and broken down at different rates. And that's where it becomes a challenge for diabetic patients. So there's certain carbohydrates that are broken down very quickly, absorbed very quickly, and will raise your blood sugars very quickly. And that clearly will have an impact if you're a diabetic person. So thinking about carbohydrates, broadly, it's divided into starches and sugars, and the starches will be all our rotis and rice and pasta and potatoes. And then the sweet stuff is your mitais and your pastries and chocolate and biscuits. So if you're a diabetic, clearly the foods that are on the right-hand side of my slide, the sweet ones, they are absorbed a lot more quickly and will have a bigger impact on your blood sugar levels. Now, to explain this concept a little bit further, if you think about carbohydrate food, there's a concept called glycemic index, which some of you may well have heard of. And what that essentially measures is how quickly or slowly carbohydrate food is digested. So foods that are broken down very quickly, absorbed very quickly, are called high GI foods. And the ones that are absorbed more slowly are low GI foods. And the slower release carbohydrates are better for people with diabetes, because clearly what that's going to do is allow that sugar to stay in your bloodstream, not give you a spike, but then last you a much longer period. Whereas a high GI food will give you a quick spike, then a quick drop, and when you get to a drop, you're starving hungry, so you're going to eat a little bit more. So thinking about carbohydrates, there's some easy things we can do. And we've talked about the diet and the processed foods that we're all eating and consuming that much more readily. So thinking about how can we make small changes to our diet to make it lower in GI so that it's more slowly absorbed, and it will maintain your sugar levels at a much steadier level. So thinking about breakfast, for example, so instead of having white or wholemeal bread, choosing granary bread or German breads like pumpernickel or rye bread will support and lower the overall GI of the foods that you eat. And then thinking about breakfast, having porridge. Porridge is great. It's slowly absorbed. Good start to the day. It'll keep you going for much longer. As is muesli or whole grain breakfast cereals will do the same. Then thinking about more of our traditional food. So we would normally have basmati rice, but changing that to brown basmati rice. As it is, basmati rice is low GI and it's quite slowly absorbed. But brown basmati rice, it's even slower. And brown pasta, brown noodles, and these are really powerful little changes that we can have, increasing the fiber, lowering the absorption of glucose. So you've got a much better sugar control over that period of time. And then thinking about stuff like khichdi that we would have, and we would all have our own favorite mix of mug and rice. And again, by reducing the amount of rice in there and having more mug in there, makes a perfectly good khichdi. Or in fact, just making khichdi out of mug works really, really well. and you're reducing the amount of carbohydrate in that mix and lowering the GI. So that works really well. And rottleys, again, rather than using white flour, using wholemeal flour. I know people say that they prefer having rottleys that are nice and white and soft, and you can make perfectly good rottleys with wholemeal flour. And again, by mixing soya, corn, or bajra within that mix, you can again improve the quality of that rottly mix by increasing the protein and lowering the rate at which that rottly is going to be broken down and absorbed into your bloodstream. Another good example and an alternative to rottlies is pudlas. Pudlas are made of chickpea flour. And again, if you use a non-stick pan, you don't need to use very much oil, and you've got a high protein rottly alternative there. Quinoa, bulgur wheat are again grains that are quite wholesome grains, quite high in protein, and really can be mixed with rice or mixed with khichdi, or actually eaten on their own instead of rice, and they work really, really well. Thinking about how my mom would cook, or a lot of families would cook, she would have added potatoes to every curry that she made. And thinking about it, if you're having dal bashak rotli, then you've got carbohydrate in rotli, you've got carbohydrate in your rice, and you're adding potatoes into the mix. So if you look at that plate model that I spoke about earlier, and we're looking at a quarter of our plate of carbohydrate, it's very difficult to get that mix together. So that's broadly some tips on lowering your GI and the absorption of carbohydrates. The next section I wanted to move on to is thinking about protein. Now, protein is important in two things. One, it supports and maintains our muscles so that our muscles remain nice and strong, and they're replaced as they get damaged. And the other element is protein has got great satiety value. So if you've got protein in your meal, so that quarter of your plate, then you will stay fuller for longer. And that, again, will stop you having that packet of crisps or that extra slice of pizza or samosa, as we mentioned a little earlier. So thinking about protein, beans and pulses are a really great source of protein, but they do also contain carbohydrate, but great because there's lots of fiber there, so they're very slowly absorbed. Nuts and seeds, again, great, but they're very high in fat. So there's a little note of caution there that we need to apply, because if you're having nuts, watch the portion size. So if you're having peanuts, like a small pop-sized packet of, say, 25 grams is a portion, or 10 to 12 almonds or walnuts would suffice. And then milk and dairy products, good source of protein, but again, we need to ensure that we're using the lower fat versions. And things like tofu, soya work really well and have been used quite extensively in cooking nowadays as well. So that's again quite good. Few examples of protein in your diet. Chickpeas, again, make a good snack. They're high in protein and high in fiber and really quite low in calories. I've included meat, fish and eggs in there just really for completion. I appreciate that a lot of people are either vegetarian or vegan. So the next element of it, and we talked about half a plate full of fruit and vegetables. Now, fruit and vegetables are provide us with a low-calorie, nutrient-rich sort of products. And really, by going for all different colors, varieties, and including these in our diet, will not only provide you with vitamins and minerals, but also the phytonutrients that will support your heart health. So thinking about your plate, filling half the plate up with vegetables is really an excellent way for balancing your plate, and it'll ensure the calorie content remains low, and we get better balance. So the last slide, really, from me, I wanted to talk about fats and oils, and really that from the perspective of calories, because weight for weight, fats have more calories than protein or carbohydrate. So small quantities, small changes can make a huge difference in your calorie content. And the second thing is, it's the saturated fat. Saturated fat is likely to increase your cholesterol and your heart disease instant. So it's thinking about swapping, say, butter and ghee, coconut oil for olive oil or rapeseed oil. Again, small changes, but essential ones, and will make quite a big difference to your cholesterol level. And then using low-fat dairy products like semi-skim milk, low-fat yogurt, cheese are good ways to cut down on saturated fat. Then kind of moving on to thinking about very practically, again, when you do the vagar, measure the oil, use a spoonful, and then that way you can control the amount of oil that's going into that particular dish. And certainly, rather than just pouring the oil in, as majority of people would do, you are putting a bit of a control in place. And by reducing the amount of oil, you're reducing the amount of calories and your calorie balance, as we've talked about a little earlier. And certainly, if there's a dish which has got oil floating on top, that's far too much oil in the dish. So that's thinking about the oil that you're using, no matter whether it's olive oil or butter or ghee, it's the quantity of oil in the vagar is what we're talking about. Then, as Kamlesh Bhai said, save deep fried food, including farsan and nasto for special occasions. And keeping sort of takeaway food, eating out, again, for special occasions, because these are the things that they're not designed to be eaten on a daily basis, and it's something that we should be avoiding. The other thing is things like pickles. We can easily go for varieties that are not sweet or oily. And lastly, I just wanted to mention the reusing of oil. Again, in a lot of families, there's a karai full of oil which gets used and reused again. And what happens when oil is heated to that sort of high level is that there's subtle changes that happen to the fat, and we get more what we call trans fats being developed, and that will impact your heart health. So really use the oil once and then discard it. Use it less often, and when you get back to frying again, use a fresh batch of oil. So these are some very practical tips. I haven't gone into the technical behind the advice. Kamlesh Bhai gave us a really good overview on what the profile of our population is, and how that has impacted the rates of diabetes and heart disease in our population. So I will finish there. I'm happy to take questions as we open up.
Thank you, Smita Ben, for that really informative presentation about the food and the food that we eat and to make the right choices. That one about using oil again and again is a really good example of the practical things that we can do to help ourselves every single day. We've heard some really great things today about diabetes and how to manage diabetes better and also how to prevent it. I'm going to now introduce Jyotiben Shah, who has been helping us with these webinars since we started. This is our fourth one. And Jyotiben will be now facilitating the Q&A. She is a fantastic household name now with us doing this week after week, every fortnight. A urological consultant surgeon from the Midlands, and she's going to facilitate this Q&A today. Welcome, Jyotiben, again, and we've got lots and lots of questions. A couple I've also posted here in the chat on Zoom that I picked up from our email address for OWL. So handing over to you now.
Jinendra Badane, thank you, Prafula Ben, and thank you all for joining us today. I'd like to invite Professor Kunthi, Smita Ben, Zeel Ben, and Tushar Bhai to join us. પણ એ લોકો જોઈન થાય એટલામાં હું તમને એક વસ્તુ સમજાવું. દુનિયામાં દર 7 સેકન્ડ એક જણ ડાયાબિટીસ અથવા ડાયાબિટીસના કોઈ કોમ્પ્લિકેશનના કારણે મરે છે. અને આજે આપણે ઘણું બધું ડાયાબિટીસનું સાંભળ્યું છે, પણ હકીકતમાં આ વસ્તુ અને આ રોગ શું છે? આપણા કોષા આપણને શક્તિ આપે છે, સુવા, જાગવા, ચાલવા, વિચારવા, કોઈ પણ પ્રવૃત્તિ માટે આપણને શક્તિની જરૂરત છે. જેવી રીતે આપણે પેટ્રોલ ગાડીમાં ભરીએ છીએ તો જ ગાડી ચાલે છે, એવી રીતે આપણા કોષાને પણ ઉર્જાની જરૂરત છે. અને આપણને એ ઉર્જા ગ્લુકોઝમાંથી મળે છે. એ આપણને સ્મિતાબેને ઘણું સમજાવ્યું. અને શરીરમાં ગ્લુકોઝ ઇન્સ્યુલિન સાથે, ઇન્સ્યુલિન જે આપણા શરીરમાં બને છે એની સાથે લોહીમાં ફરે છે. હવે તમને હું સમજાવું કે એ લોહીમાં ઇન્સ્યુલિન અને ગ્લુકોઝ સાથે ફરે અને આપણા કરોડો કોષાને એ ગ્લુકોઝ પહોંચાડે છે, તો જ આપણને એ શક્તિ મળે છે. અને તમે એમ માનો કે ઇન્સ્યુલિન એક જાતની ચાવી છે, તો એ બંને જણા કોષા સાથે પહોંચે છે અને એ કોષાનો દરવાજો આ ઇન્સ્યુલિન જે ચાવી છે ને એ ખોલે છે. એક દરવાજો ખોલે તો કોષાની અંદર આ ગ્લુકોઝ જઈ શકે અને એ કોષામાં શોષણ થાય તો જ આપણને શક્તિ મળે છે. પ્રોફેસર કુંતીએ આપણને સમજાવ્યું કે ટાઈપ 1 ડાયાબિટીસ છે એમાં ઇન્સ્યુલિન આપણા શરીરમાં નથી બનતું, એટલે ગ્લુકોઝ શરીરમાં વધે છે. અને ટાઈપ 2 ડાયાબિટીસમાં ઇન્સ્યુલિન બને છે, પણ ઇન્સ્યુલિન પ્રત્યે આપણા કોષા અવરોધી બને છે, જેથી ગ્લુકોઝ વધી જાય છે અને આપણને કોષામાં મળતું નથી. એટલે that's a very brief ગુજરાતીમાં તમને explanation કે what is diabetes, જે આજે આટલી બધી આપણે વાતો કરીએ છીએ. ચાલો હવે આપણે સવાલ તરફ જઈએ. And as Prafula Ben has already alluded to, we are inundated with so many questions. But Zeel Ben, if I could start with you for what was a really, really powerful story today, and we thank you for that very emotional story as well. I mean, you must have grown up with a real fear of this disease. How did you and your family cope with that?
I don't know. I was quite young at the time, so it's not something we really spoke about, I guess. It was just actions. So seeing my dad taking the injections and going to see the diet, going for his regular checks and that sort of thing. So for us, like even my younger sister, she was only 16 when he passed away. So for most of her life, she was only very young. So we didn't really talk about it as such. It was just seeing what he was doing, his actions, and just going through it. And, like I was saying, it was the norm for him, and it was the norm for us because we didn't know any different.
But were you afraid that perhaps this might come through the generations to you, your sister?
Yeah, definitely. And like I said, I always thought that, there was 1 in 3 chance of me or my sisters getting it. like I said, I didn't know the statistics at the time. It was quite high, but obviously because it was hereditary and it runs throughout my whole of my dad's family, you know, there's still a chance I could still get it today. You know, there's nothing stopping me from getting it, and that's why I think it's good to be conscious of that throughout your life, you know, and be health conscious. And, you know, as Smita Ben said, you know, think about what you're eating and, you know, that sort of thing. So, yeah.
And no, thank you, because Zilben, actually, it's really important that youngsters like yourself come forward and start opening this discussion on this aspect of this, such a common household disease. Everyone knows the word diabetes, right? Professor Kunthi, would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have a taboo about diabetes. So we've done studies, qualitative studies, where we've screened people, white Europeans, South Asians. You tell a white European, you screen them, you've done an oral glucose tolerance test, you tell them you've got diabetes. There's a sense of bereavement when they're told they've got diabetes. You tell a South Asian person they've got diabetes, there isn't that sense of bereavement. You know,
yeah, it's an expectation.
That's the kind of attitude. We were shocked. They just accepted that they're going to get it because the whole family's had it. And that's what we need to get away from, really, that you can prevent diabetes. Doesn't matter how many people in your family have diabetes.
Absolutely. And you've all been really great in putting forward some really useful and powerful tips. Tushar Bhai, I might come to you with this question. So we've had somebody who said they've been on metformin for 30 years. Now, this is in your role, if you could put your pharmacy hat on for this. So someone's been on metformin for 30 years, and over the past 5 years, glycoside has been added in. And the question they've asked is, what are the side effects of taking these drugs later in life, you know, for such a long period of time?
So my professional hat, I've actually stopped practicing pharmacy for last 7 varas thi yam. So I've lost a lot of knowledge. Yeah. And probably Professor Kunthi will be the better one to answer on that. But side effects, if you see them, you will see them from day one. They will not get worse over a period of time. You will see other complications coming in, and that's a side effect of medications we all take, yeah? But not directly from metformin and glycoside, yeah?
So you're absolutely right, Tushar. You don't get side effects. What will happen is, if you're going to get any side effects, and the most common one for metformin is you get diarrhea, bloating, nausea sometimes, but about 20% get that. But if you start slowly and move up, normally you can overcome that as well. But what will happen is you will need another tablet. Metformin and sulfonylurea glycoside will not be enough. Type 2 diabetes is a progressive disease. It gradually gets worse. The amount of insulin you produce from your body gradually goes down. The insulin that acts on the muscles and the liver doesn't work as well. So you'll be ending up on a third tablet and possibly injectable therapies such as insulin as well.
And yet the message you're coming across, all of you are portraying, is that a lot of this is actually preventable. You know, so it's better that you don't get to that stage where you're having this accumulative additive drug effect, right?
Even if you had diabetes, and Smita might want to add to that, there's some incredible studies that have come out in the last 3 years that you can reverse diabetes. But to reverse diabetes, you need to take some drastic actions. That's having an 800-calorie diet, and maybe I can talk about it until the cows come home. But maybe Smita wants to come into that.
Yeah, I mean, there's some really, really powerful evidence coming out about reversal of type 2 diabetes, but like you say, 800-calorie diet, it's not sustainable for a long period of time, and it's much better to make those lifestyle changes that we've talked about. So altering your diet, increasing your activity, and managing your diabetes as carefully as possible. But even like a small 5% loss in your weight will have quite a powerful impact on your diabetes. And that is very manageable. And it's something that's achievable by by majority of people, kind of making the sort of lifestyle changes that we've talked about, to get to a point where you're losing 15% of your body weight. That's when you will get the reversal. So, and that is incredibly challenging unless you're in a very controlled environment. But it's possible.
No, that's great. Thank you, Smita. Thank you, Professor Kunthi. Whilst I got you, Smita, there are so many, we're inundated with lots of dietary questions. So let me ask you a couple of those, if I may.
Yes.
Is Ferrari no lot better for rotli?
I would say not, because the fiber content is not very high. Even the Ferrari is, I think it's made out of cassava, and cassava is low GI. But the fiber content is quite low. I think you'd be better off doing wholemeal flour and perhaps adding sort of like soya or quinoa or cornmeal to it to lower the GI a little bit more.
And I think you said in your talk, bajrano
lot is excellent, and so having rotla instead of rotli is even better.
Excellent.
It's even better because it's higher in protein and overall very, very low GI. So it's good thing to have.
Simple tip.
So I'm going to tell you, Professor Kunthi, you've got no time to go to the gym.
I've lost, this is the honest truth, I've lost 12 kilos in the pandemic.
Oh, congratulations.
The only reason is because for the first time in my life, I've got a routine. I walk to work and work back. Before I was just traveling everywhere.
Excellent. And that's great. That's come out of COVID, hasn't it? Yep. Because you can't get on a plane anymore to go and deliver a talk. Yeah. So yeah, great. Some positive change. So Smita Ben, whilst I've got you, so somebody has asked, can methi help cure or prevent diabetes? Apparently this person pani maine soak kare ne pachi pani peete. So does that help or cure or prevent? Because then we're all going to do it, right? Methi is so great tasting.
Yeah. There's products like Karela, for example. Karela will lower your blood sugar levels, and there's very good evidence for that. But you have to have a controlled amount of Karela every day at a particular time in order for it to be effective. Methi, I haven't seen any evidence for methi, but even if it is, it would be something similar to that.
So good about, right?
But it lowers your blood sugar levels, as does guar.
It comes off your skin.
Yeah, well, maybe you can put some gore in it. How's that? So Professor Kunthi, if I could come to you, we've had a number of people ask some fairly specific questions about blood sugar levels. So we've had somebody write in and say their parents' diabetes, morning fasting sugars are high, and after dinner they're okay. What can be done about this fluctuating blood sugar level?
All depends what they're on.
Okay.
It depends on the medications they're on. You know, if you're on insulin, then what we say is you need to fix your fasting first. So you take the basal insulin, what's called the long-acting insulin, at night, and that fixes your morning basal insulin. The other one, if they are on insulin, it's worth getting a short-term period of what's called a Libra, and that tells you your glucose profile, and that'll tell you what you're doing that's bringing the sugars up or low. But most of the time, people with type 2 diabetes, if they're not on insulin, you don't get such high and low peaks if they're not on insulin. It's only when you're on insulin you get real highs and lows.
So someone else who's written in and said their mother's got diabetes, hasn't quite specified which type, but has stated that the sugars fluctuate from sort of 7 to 10 to then going up to between 21, 25, and they've asked why.
Again, most likely if they're type 2, they're not on insulin, it's related to food. It's usually after food. I mean, even a low of 10 is not low. They need to be below that. And that's high. They need to be in the range of 5 to 8.
Right.
So usually you can tell if you have certain foods and then you measure it, you can tell 2 hours later, 1 hour later, that it's shot up. It's the food that you're getting.
So the effect of different foodstuffs on your sugar, yeah. Someone else, Professor Kunthi, has asked, how can you cure steroid-induced diabetes?
Right, so if they're already on steroids at the moment, it's very difficult because they're on it for a certain condition. And it's usually a condition that you need to continue the steroids for. So you can't stop the steroids. But what you can do is reduce your risk by doing all the other lifestyle things we've said about exercise, about diet. So the message would be exactly the same.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Because again, the theme that's coming out of all of you on the panel today is the diet, the exercise, both to prevent it and once you've got it to try and get it under better control. And Tushar Bhai, if I could maybe come to you then, you know, as a community leader, it's amazing. We're putting on all these webinars to try and educate Apra Samajne, you know, to get the message out. But is there anything else we can do? Maybe some sort of, you know, monthly, weekly, you know, chai chats. We have chai chats in Leicester, right? But Professor Kunthi, that very broad, but Emma nasto torelo na bisa kai. So, you know, because it is about education and awareness, right?
Yeah.
Yes, it is about awareness. So as a community, you know, we are changing slowly. It's not. It's very difficult to change overnight. What we cook at our community events are changing. We are trying to get away from more and more fried food. You know, આપણે મોટા ફંક્શન આપણે ઘરે તો આપણું તળેલું તો બહુ ઓછું થઈ ગયું છે બધાના ઘરે. You know, because we realize કે આપણે પહેલાની જેમ આપણે we're not doing physical work as such. બધાના jobs are now sitting down. Or computer orientated or sitting down jobs, bija kind office work, whatever. Yeah. The manual work, apna dada dadi bada karta tha. We have stopped doing a lot of that work now. Yeah. And at community events, apne su hoy shaak hoy, dal bhat hoy, and puri hoy tadeli. And you know, our bodies are not used to it anymore. So aste we are changing. And hopefully going forward, we will go on to healthier foods. Them Smita bene kidu rotli ne evu kind karsu. And actually, as a community, we invested in a roti making machine last year. Yeah, which is good. But going back to what Dr. Kamlesh and Professor Kamlesh and Smita Ben Keche, lifestyles and diets, that's the most important aspect. You know, I'm proud that mara potana gharma, I have a living testament. Mara dadima, grandmother, you know, has worked her whole life. And any diet was very simple. And બે રોટલી એટલે બે રોટલી એમ નહીં કે આજે શાક વધારે ભાવ્યું તો ત્રીજી રોટલી ખાઓ કે વધારે લાડુ ખાઓ કે નહીં. We are all tempted by what's laid out on the table. Yeah, you know, because we often think, yes, I finish કરી જવાનું છે, બગાડવું નથી. But she was so good, you know, any limited limit. And today she's 106 years old. You know, living testament. Wow. No diabetes, no blood pressure, nothing at all. So to me, she's a good example. Am I able to follow her diet? Very, very difficult. It's very difficult for all of us. Yeah.
But you've got good genes, right?
Yes, you've got good genes, and hopefully we've all inherited some of those as well. Yes. Yeah.
So we have got so many questions, and you know, thank you to our audience for sending them in. But unfortunately, so we're going to come to the last couple of questions. So on that note, Smita, perhaps if I could draw you back into this one. Someone asked about intermittent fasting. Is this an effective way to control both portion sizes and food intake, and thereby control diabetes?
Yes, I mean, again, there's some very good evidence coming out for intermittent fasting or controlling the number of hours within which you eat, which automatically kind of controls the food quantity you eat. But also there's a link with the insulin response, which Kamlesh Bhai may be better answering. But there's yes, some very good evidence coming out that does help.
So Kamlesh Bhai, can we recommend intermittent fasting?
So in fact, I mean, they've done randomized control trials and done meta-analysis of all of these. There are so many diets that work. And we can't recommend a particular diet for every person. what suits you. At the end of the day, it's got to be individualized to that person. So maybe 5 and 2, maybe intermittent fasting. Maybe there are people who just do eat within 8-hour window period. Maybe just reducing the amount you're eating. So whatever suits you. But on the whole, it's reducing the total amount of calorie you're taking, no matter what method you use.
If I could ask you, just turn that round and be devil's advocate here, Professor Kunthi. We've got a high prevalence of diabetes in the Asian community. That's why we're here. That's why we're having this discussion. And you, more than any of us, you're in the heart of it in Leicester, right? Yet, in our communities, whether you're Sanatan Hindu or whether you're Jain, there's a huge amount of fasting going on. I mean, I talk about myself. I do Ikdanus on Monday, Thursday, and then my husband will also do it on Saturday, Shanivar karse. So at least 3 days, we're really controlling it. So, and I know that loads of families are doing that, yet we've got a high prevalence.
But most of the people who, and Smita, when I'm sure comes in, most of the people who fast, they eat more when they're fasting.
And they eat carbohydrates. So they'll eat potatoes and then they will eat, so it tends to be very, very high in carbohydrates.
Not
all the Farali food is high in carbs.
Each badam, 10 calories.
Crikey. Okay.
So if you're eating batata nushak and then badam pak, then you're
so we're all right.
So you're absolutely fine.
So Professor Kunthi, I'm going to perhaps come to you with your sort of COVID and SAGE hat on now. So we have had a number of questions, as would be expected at this time, about both COVID, diabetes, and a couple of people have written in and said that in particular after the second vaccine, they've noticed that their blood sugars have risen and have been uncontrollable for a period of time.
Right. So we've heard a lot of reports of this, that the people's blood glucose has gone up, but it's not gone up massively. I'm not aware of anyone who's been in an uncontrolled situation. And the main reason is the way the vaccine works. It induces immunity. And when you get that immune response, you get increased inflammatory markers, and that raises insulin resistance. But this is usually for a short period only. Okay. And then the glucose level should go down. But we have had a number of reports where the glucose does go up.
Brilliant. That's really useful. Thank you so much, Professor Kunthi. Thank you, Zilben. We are going to have to call it a day. We could go on forever otherwise, but there are so many questions. So thank you all very much, Zilben, Smita, Tushar Bhai. It's been an excellent talk. I'm sure you'll all agree. And we've had almost 400 devices today, which is incredible on a warm Thursday evening. So thank you all very much. Profula, if I'll hand back to you, Madane Mara Jaitinendra.
Thank you, Jyoti Ben. And again, a fantastic range of questions there, and a lot of really good information has been shared. Tushar Bhai, kai kevu tu tomare?
Yes, sorry. Apologies to a lot of people. Of course, ઘણા બધા આપણને questions આવેલા છે આપણા chat facility on YouTube. So if you can all please just send an email to owl@oshwal.org. So our professional team will come back to you. આપણે બધા questions અત્યારના નથી લઈ શકતા because of time constraints. So if you can just drop us an email and we will reply to you. Thank you. Prafulaben.
Thank you, Tushar Bhai. And my grateful thanks to Professor Kamlesh Kunthi, to Smita Ben, and to Zeel for spending time with us today. And of course, as ever, Jyoti Ben as well for all the work that we do in the background to put these together. Our next event, which will be on the 13th of May, when we're going to welcome Professor Nilesh Samani and Professor Anil Homis. Our subject is heart care. So we're talking about how to look after our heart, and also CPR and how to learn CPR. For that session, we've also got, courtesy of St. John's Ambulance, 2 CPR courses, which people can actually win in a prize draw. So do send us some, I'll put information about how to do that. But 13th of May is our next event. My thanks again to our speakers today. Just one final thing to say. Obviously, અત્યારે આપણી આંબેલો ચાલે છે. And Kamlesh, I just wanted to ask you a question maybe about Ambel food. So Ambel ma બધું જે food અમે consume કરીએ છીએ Jain community is boiled pulses mostly and એમાં બાજરાના રોટલા પણ હોય છે. So actually, Smita Ben, is it something you can advise on whether that diet is actually good for us?
Well, that sounds pretty good to me. Rotlo and pulses, so lots of protein there and low GI, so that should be pretty good for diabetics.
Yeah, and also એમાં છે ને આપણે વઘારતા નથી. It's only boiled foods and એમાં કાંઈ spices નથી હોતા, you know. So the whole top of Ambel is about actually doing the tyag of swad. So the foods that we eat are about, you know, controlling our sense of swad. And I'm told that lots of people who do Ambels are very healthy people. So I think that's definitely a plus for me in terms of Bajrana Rotla and pulses Bafela. May not taste very nice, but, you know, something we could definitely do when we're talking about cutting down on foods and, you know, controlling what we eat and the hours we eat at. So thank you everyone again. And we'll see you in fact, 3 weeks' time. So it's the last Thursday of the month and the second Thursday of the month that we're doing these webinars. So the next one, as I was saying, is Thursday, the 13th of May. We'll be talking about heart health. My grateful thanks to everyone today and keep safe, everyone. Thank you. Jai Jinendra.